welcome to Middle East Now. Let's take a look at today's headlines. The second U.S. aircraft carrier has arrived in the Middle East as tensions rise amid fears of an all-out war. The family of an Israeli-American hostage speaks out at the Democratic National Convention in a move that may divide the party. And the United Arab Emirates has just decided to officially recognize the Taliban's ambassador to the Gulf in a huge diplomatic win for the militant group. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us on Middle East Now. Well, as Israel's border with Lebanon remains fiery, now another U.S. aircraft carrier has made its way to the Middle East, and our correspondent Ariel Osran has the details.
The damage from an Israeli airstrike on the southern Lebanese town of El Khiam overnight. It was part of what the IDF called extensive airstrikes against Hezbollah facilities in 10 separate areas in southern Lebanon. The widespread strikes came in response to a Hezbollah barrage of 50 rockets the previous day at the northern town of Katzrin that caused significant damage and wounded an Israeli man. That didn't stop Hezbollah from continuing to launch dozens of rockets throughout Thursday, causing minor damage to some communities and IDF bases.
I'm here at the site of rocket impact near a school in the town. This was a rocket that didn't cause any injuries. As you can see, firefighters are at the scene.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited on Wednesday the Ramat David Air Base near Haifa, where Netanyahu hinted at Israel's offensive capabilities.
I'm here at the Air Force Base to closely monitor our preparation against threats from both near and far. We are ready for any scenario, both on defense and offense. The Air Force is our iron fist that knows how to strike at the soft underbelly of our enemies. It proves it time and time again. And if necessary, we will prove it again, and with even greater force.
With spiraling violence between Israel and Hezbollah showing no sign of losing momentum, a second American aircraft carrier arrived in the Middle East on Wednesday, a signal to Hezbollah and Iran. The USS Abraham Lincoln and accompanying destroyers arrived after the U.S. Defense Secretary ordered the strike group to accelerate its speed amid fears of a regional conflict. It's worth noting that the carrier, equipped with F-35 fighter jets, is originally designated to the Pacific Fleet, a sign that the U.S. sees the Middle East as the current #1 biggest threat, and one miscalculation away from erupting.
Let's turn to our correspondent, Balir Sladin, who is joining us now from the north of Israel. Balir, what is the latest from where you are?
Yes, in the past hour, the sirens were heard in the western Galilee, specifically in Shtula and Zara'it. Apparently, there were no damage or any casualties as a result of that attack. But earlier today, here in Kiryat Shmona, where we are, there were 2 rockets that landed in open areas. Also, didn't cause any casualties or damage, but the sirens went off at least twice today in this area of Upper Galilee. Now, this is happening after a day where 50 rockets, Katyusha rockets specifically, were fired toward Katzrin and caused damage to 2 homes, and 1 person was wounded. And apparently the attacks on southern Lebanon this night or last night were as a retaliatory attack for that large barrage of rockets. The IDF, or specifically the Air Force, has targeted Hezbollah infrastructure in 10 different locations, according to what the IDF spokesperson has said. And according to Lebanese reports, we're talking about places like Ita Shab and Marjayun al-Khiyam, and also one town that is rarely targeted, which is Adalun, 10 kilometers north of the city of Tyre, still in southern Lebanon, but it's rarely targeted. But apparently the IDF, for the 3rd day in a row, for the 3rd night actually, targeting Hezbollah infrastructure, specifically ammunition storages and military military buildings, and we've seen that yesterday also upscale in the number of attacks against militants. So at least 5 militants were announced dead by Hezbollah yesterday. Today there were no drone attacks toward any vehicles in southern Lebanon, but the Air Force is continuing, of course, these tactics, according to what we understand from the IDF spokesperson's announcements yesterday. Now, this is regarding what's happening on the ground, but today also the Foreign Minister of Lebanon, Abu Habib, talked to the media and said that if the negotiations in Qatar collapse and no deal would be in sight, then the situation here might be different, and of course the scenario of a full-blown war would be on the table. He hopes, at least according to what he said, that this is not going to be the case because Lebanon is not ready for war, according to what he said.
All right, Balir Sladin joining us from the north of Israel. Thank you for that clear update. We're going to turn now to our guests in the studio. We have former Mossad agent Avner Avraham joining us and international security analyst Dan Perry with us as well. So obviously we heard, the kind of latest breakdown of the tensions that we're seeing on the northern border. There are now reports coming out of the Washington Post today that apparently U.S. officials say that Iran is now considering perhaps stepping back from its threats that it would directly attack the state of Israel and is rather hoping to direct Hezbollah into targeting Israel with a much larger attack. What do we actually know about that? And is there really any truth to these reports?
Well, I don't think we know either way. It's a very small circle of people that are involved in these deliberations or in decisions. Iran is a dictatorship. But we certainly do know that it's been about a month and the threatened and feared attack hasn't arrived. And I think to the degree that that is a surprise, it has to attach to things that happened that were unexpected. And I think the main thing that was unexpected is that the U.S. not only made very robust threats against Iran directly, but did it in public and in an escalating fashion. They began with threatening devastating consequences and then graduated to cataclysmic consequences. Now, the Iranian regime is weak. The people of Iran detest the regime, and there have been repeated bouts of protest there that the regime has suppressed rather brutally. I don't think they welcome a full war. They might have thought they can get away with some exchange with Israel that they can spin as some sort of success. But a real war with the U.S. Is a different matter altogether. I'm rather surprised that the U.S. Doesn't learn the delayed lesson from the success, if indeed Iran doesn't attack, and proceed to make to basically throw its weight around in other areas of the region as well. And you mentioned Hezbollah. That would be number one. The situation in the north that we just saw reports about is completely unacceptable. And the risks of letting it get out of hand go beyond risks that only Israel is facing. A regional war that could erupt would affect the global economy at the very least and U.S. assets all over the region. I think it's about time for the global community to treat Lebanon as a failed state that is at the very least a regional problem and realistically a global problem.
Avner, I'd like to turn to you. Obviously, we have heard the U.S. say in recent months that there's still a diplomatic push that is being made to create some type of solution with Hezbollah to move back from the front line, that border with Israel, and go past the Litani River, of course. The question is whether or not a diplomatic solution is even a relevant possibility at this time, given the escalation and attacks that we're seeing from the terror group into the country.
No way. I think that after October 7, we cannot agree for any kind of agreement. Look what happened with 1701. Even one day they didn't started this agreement. I believe that we must have, and we should have, a short war in the north, and after it we will have agreement. Now, the reason that Israel now cooperate with the U.S. government is because they are trying to give a chance to the diplomatic option, but I don't believe, because we need to find out how to move all the Hezbollah forces behind the Litani, north of the Litani. And as I told you, it's not enough. I know I have relatives from the north. Many of them will not come back and the other will not come back after just for agreement.
Right, and that is absolutely one of the fundamental issues here, is that we're, hearing statistics like only 70% of those who have been evacuated from northern Israel intend to actually go back. And what is that going to mean, for Israeli society as a whole, for the security of this country? But unfortunately, we're going to have to move over to Egypt right now. We will come back to this. According to Qatari News, the U.S. Secretary of State has reportedly proposed that Egypt take part in a plan to implement international peacekeeping forces on the Philadelphia corridor. That is, of course, that flashpoint strip of land bordering Egypt and the Gaza Strip. Now, the goal here, sorry, got something in my throat, is to allegedly pressure Israel to withdraw from the Egypt-Gaza border route in exchange for a ceasefire hostage deal. Now, at this point, it appears that will be very difficult to do, since Hamas has been using the Philadelphia corridor for years now to smuggle arms and weapons components into Gaza. And the Israeli Prime Minister has insisted that Israel will not withdraw from the route to prevent Hamas from rearming itself. Well, joining us now is Miret F. Mabrouk. She's a senior fellow, the founding director of the Egypt program, the Middle East Institute from Washington, D.C. Is there a world in which we could expect Netanyahu to agree to an international peacekeeping force being implemented to prevent weapons smuggling into Gaza from Egypt in the Philadelphia corridor?
Good afternoon. I don't know whether there's a world where you might get Prime Minister Netanyahu to agree, but I don't think there's a world where you will get the Egyptians to agree.
Now, there is no way that Israel did not know what Hamas was doing for years on the Gaza border. Why are we only seeing Israel take stronger action on this issue now?
It's a very, very good question. I think the question of whether or not there are tunnels has been contested between Egypt and Israel for a very long time. So for a very long time, we knew that there were tunnels. But according to the Egyptians, they had worked quite hard on getting them closed off a long time ago. They said they destroyed over 155 tunnels. And at the moment, the barriers that they have in place go 6 meters above ground and 6 meters below ground. So because you have to remember, it is as vital for Egypt's security that those tunnels are closed off to arms and people smuggling as well. But there is still the contention. I think what the Egyptians have said is, well, if there's proof, please provide it, and it hasn't happened yet. But the question of the corridor is a serious sticking point. And I think the best that we could hope for would be to have some form of electronically monitored presence in the corridor. But I don't think there will be more than that.
I mean, how would Egypt react to having Israeli forces on the border? And at the same time, I mean, the question is, how could they be angry if they know that Hamas has been smuggling in weapons and their forces have not necessarily been preventing this? Okay,
so it isn't a matter of being angry. It's a matter of the fact that there is an agreement in place. The status of the Philadelphia corridor was discussed in the 1979 Accords, and then again in 2005 when Israel withdrew from Gaza. So at the moment, Israeli presence in that strip is a contravention of that agreement. Now, what happens is, I mean, as with all agreements, it's between Egypt and Israel to sort out. But you have to remember that Israeli troops on the border is a direct threat to Egypt's security. And as concerned as Israel is about its own security, they have to realize that the Egyptians are also concerned for their security. So that issue is going to be a continuous sticking block.
Our guest in studio, international security analyst Dan Perry, also wants to respond to this. And then I'd like to actually bring our panel kind of into the wider conversation here.
I mean, I understand about the 1979 peace treaty, but the idea that Israeli troops along the border with Egypt constitute a threat is a little bit preposterous, considering that there is just south of the Philadelphia corridor 200 kilometers of Israeli border with Egypt. And there is a certain limitation imposed on the troops that Israel can have, and in particular the tanks Israel can have, all across that 200 and some kilometer border. That's true. That can be discussed. But that the Philadelphia corridor in principle is off limits to Israelis, if Israel had a good reason to want control over it, I think is something that I would expect the Egyptian government, as a pragmatic government that surely understands there's a pretty big problem in Gaza that is also Egypt's problem, because they don't want smuggling any more than Israel does, to be a little bit more flexible. I think they've climbed on a very high branch rather unwisely on this issue, and I would expect the Sisi government, that is famously anti-terrorist, to be a little bit more reasonable. And this is in no way to say that I think Netanyahu's policies are reasonable on the Philadelphia corridor, because Israel agreed to pull out in its own proposal on May 31st. This demand only came up after. There's a lot to be said about the actual utility of that corridor. The tunnels go under it, not through it. But putting that aside, for Egypt to be upset is frankly absurd.
You know, turning back to our guest on Zoom, you know, how big of a hurdle is Netanyahu's demand that the IDF stay deployed along the Philadelphia corridor when it comes to closing a ceasefire deal? And is this something that is also make or break for Israel and Egypt's relationship?
Okay, so as to how the Egyptian government feels about it, you probably need to talk to the Egyptian government. From an analysis point of view, I can tell you what I hear from the Egyptian government, which is the presence, because you have to remember that the presence of Israeli troops is a tinderbox, if you like, for escalation. The Egyptians are already worried about this situation escalating over its border. They're looking at hundreds of thousands of refugees pouring over that border, and that comes with its own set of security issues, not because Egypt doesn't want refugees, but because there is a particular set of security issues associated with this one. So to call their fears preposterous or not preposterous, I think that they would insist that it wasn't preposterous, but whether it is or not, as I've said, as far as they're concerned, there is a treaty in place, and that needs to be enforced. Having said that, there will always be, I mean, the Egyptian-Israeli agreement, the Egyptian-Israeli relationship is one that is an extremely pragmatic one. It has held since those Accords, and it has held well, and there's a great deal of security and intelligence cooperation and all of this. It's fairly. But this last conflict, I think, is really pushing, it's straining that relationship at the seams for various reasons. I think the idea is the Egyptians feel that they're being taken for granted, in that there isn't a nuanced understanding of how far they can go, beyond which you can say, well, this is not pragmatic, this is just too much. So they have security concerns, they have regional concerns. They do not want to, there is enormous empathy for the Palestinian issue in Israel, and therefore they have domestic concerns that they need to look to. Right. And I think it's going to be a serious stumbling block.
All right, Meret F. Mabrouk, thank you so much for joining us from Washington, D.C. with your analysis. We are turning now to the Democratic National Convention. Up until now, the subject of the Israel-Hamas war has barely been addressed by speakers at the Democratic National Convention, but last night the topic was brought to the forefront as the parents of American-Israeli hostage Hersh Goldberg Polin addressed the crowd. Take a look.
Day 3 of the Democratic National Convention was a dynamic one, featuring a performance from Stevie Wonder, an Oprah Winfrey surprise appearance, and some of the most problematic issues brought up by speakers thus far. Capping off the night was a speech from Tim Walz as he accepted the party's vice presidential nomination. He spoke of his progressive policies, his admiration for Kamala Harris, his wife's infertility issues, and his love for his family.
It's the honor of my life to accept your nomination for Vice President of the United States, and I love you.
Most Democrats have avoided the subject up till now, but by the penultimate day, protests against the U.S. support for Israel's war in Gaza began to overshadow the convention.
And our message is to tell the Democratic Party, to tell the DNC, not in our name, not with our tax dollars, not with U.S.-made weapons, enough is enough. An arms embargo must be imposed against the apartheid regime of Israel.
Thousands marched towards the convention center following a night of police clashes outside Chicago's Israeli consulate.
American people are calling for a ceasefire and an end to the genocide, an end to aid to Israel, and we are complicit in genocide, unfortunately, and we're calling for an end to all of that.
Inside, however, Rachel Goldberg and John Polin received a standing ovation and chants of "Bring them home" as they took the stage. Their son Hirsch was one of 250 Israelis taken hostage into the Gaza Strip 10 months ago.
This is a political convention, but needing our only son and all of the cherished hostages home is not a political issue. It is a humanitarian issue.
Democrats have been divisive on the topic, splitting between Palestinian and Israeli causes.
In a competition of pain, there are no winners.
The speech even earned applause from some of the most pro-Palestinian House members, proving to be a rare unifying moment for the party.
Well, joining us now is our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. Mike, the decision to allow Israeli hostage Hirsch Goldberg Polin's family to speak at the DNC was certainly a pointed one. What were the reactions from the Democratic voter base, and how have more progressive left voters responded to this choice?
Well, it's obviously become a big deal here over the last 24 hours for numerous reasons, Natasha. First among them, the reception that the Goldberg-Polin parents got out here. They told us after their speech last night that there was trepidation, that they weren't really sure, that they were afraid they might get booed. They didn't know what to expect stepping on stage, which is an indication in and of itself as to how much of a chasm there's thought to be in the Democratic Party on the Israel of the issue Gaza war. The fact that they got the reception that they got is telling in that maybe there isn't the chasm that everybody assumed there was, that maybe the Democratic Party as a whole, the silent majority, as they say, backs Israel and backs the hostage families in this particular conflict, while the vocal minority out on the streets is grabbing up all the attention when it shouldn't be focused on them. We did have an opportunity to speak with Hirsch's mother, Rachel, on camera and asked her about a particular line from Hirsch's father, Jonathan, in the speech last night when he said to this crowd out here that in a competition of pain, there are no winners. It seemed to be handcrafted for this particular audience. Here's Rachel's reaction to our question about that line.
I do think that people get confused and think that this is an adversarial paradigm, that it's like a team sport and you have to choose a side. And you don't have to choose a side, that's first of all. And second of all, when we're trying to compete in who has the bigger tragic story, no one wins. And we're here, this is where we are, and we have to go forward. And I think that was something we really wanted to emphasize tonight.
Now, Mike, pro-Palestinian delegates have been denied a Democratic convention speaking slot. What kind of response are we hearing from the Democratic Party on that and the voter base?
6, 7, 8.
There's still back and forth going on, Natasha, but as of yet, there's been no guarantee and no offer put forward to any Palestinian voices to be put up on stage. The group Muslim Women for Harris put out a statement last night saying they can no longer continue in good conscience based on partially the fact that Hirsch's parents up on stage in their speech last night gave more empathy to Palestinian Americans than the Harris-Waltz campaign has. That's in the words of the Muslim Women for Harris group. Meanwhile, the so-called uncommitted movement of voters who have been pushing for change in the Democratic Party's policies on Israel and the Palestinians are holding a sit-in outside the United Center here and will continue to do so throughout the day as they push for a path forward to have a Palestinian take the stage here. But again, so far, there's been no give from the Democratic Party.
All right, Mike, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us from the DNC. Very interesting to hear what Rachel Goldberg-Polin had to say following that speech. Now, returning back to Israel, who should be held accountable for the security failures on October 7th? Well, while formally resigning as head of the IDF's Military Intelligence Directorate, Israeli Major General Aharon Haliva once again claimed responsibility for his personal failures on October 7th. But he also called on other Israeli leaders to do the same. It's been 321 days since that fateful date, and the majority of the government has yet to be held accountable.
More than 10 months since the deadliest attack on the Jewish state, and the question of accountability is still weighing on Israeli leaders.
On that Saturday, we failed to fulfill the most important mission which we are tasked with, providing a warning for war. The top responsibility for the failures of the Military Intelligence Directorate is on me.
In his last speech as head of the IDF's Military Intelligence Directorate, Major General Aharon Haliva not only reiterated his personal responsibility for October 7th, but called on other leaders to step up as well.
Taking responsibility and setting a personal example is a core value of the IDF and in leadership in general. Taking responsibility is not words, it must be actions. My decision to end my role and resign from the IDF is the norm in which I was educated.
Haliva reiterated calls for a state commission of inquiry into the failures that led to the war, a request Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government still doesn't want to see, as most of them have yet to take responsibility for the October 7th failures and argue an investigation should take place after the war is complete. It's become a political issue inside Israel, which was discussed during an independent civilian commission of inquiry. The mother of hostage Matan Zangauker said it's this fear of political consequence that's also holding up a hostage release deal.
I would like to reveal to this committee that when I sat down with the head of the Mossad, David Barnea, and received an update on the negotiations, I was told by the head of Mossad, and I quote, "Dear Einav, unfortunately, in the current political constellation, a deal for the release of abductees is not possible." As soon as the head of the Mossad tells me such a statement, even though I know he is not a political person, he is the head of an intelligence organization. I know that this statement was made so that I could resonate with it in the public sphere.
The Mossad has since denied Zangauker's statements. But while Benjamin Netanyahu's government is trying to push off a state inquiry until after the war with Hamas, 109 hostages are still in Gaza.
All right, we're going out for a quick commercial break, but don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back on Middle East Now. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and we'll see you soon.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
And we are back on Middle East Now. I'm Natasha Kirchak, and thanks for sticking with us. Well, the Israeli negotiation team has departed to Cairo for renewed talks on the hostage deal. And here to further discuss this in the studio, we have our two guests, international affairs analyst Dan Perry, and of course, former Mossad agent Avner Avraham. So the first question is, what is new in these negotiations, if anything at all?
There is no negotiation. The Hamas didn't come to Doha. Okay, it's just a game between the U.S. government and the Israeli government. Okay, and we have to remember that yesterday, for the first time, according to Egyptian sources, Sinwar asked for protection. He asked for permission that Israel will not kill him. And I believe, since he replaced Haniya, I believe that in the future we can think about the possibility to do something similar to Arafat in Beirut, and he can leave safely the Gaza Strip. Okay? It can be part of a new deal.
Right. So this, of course, suggests that perhaps he's willing to save himself in exchange for essentially sacrificing his people and the cause of Hamas. But can we assume that at this point, after everything that has happened, that that's really realistic?
That Israel would agree to it? Look, the fundamental question for Israel is the degree to which it wants to save the hostages. Israel cannot be expected to pay any price, right? Like, it can't change the name of the country to Palestine, probably. But there is something like 3/4 support in Israel for the original deal, where Israel would pull out and end the war and leave Hamas in place in exchange for all the hostages. Mm-hmm. And we haven't yet mentioned the hostages on the show here, but there are 109 hostages that are alive still in Gaza, and the majority of the people in Israel want to prioritize that. Is there some mechanism that can enable Sinwar to accept the additional conditions that Israel is now demanding regarding the presence on the Philadelphia corridor? I don't know. I've been saying for months that part of Israel's toolkit might be allowing Sinwar and another 1,000 scumbags that are his entourage to depart the country and give them safe passage to Qatar or whatever other ally of Hamas that might deserve them. Can Israel give him a life insurance policy the way he appears to be asking? By the way, it is rather comical because his whole raison d'etre in life is to be a martyr, and his moral standing in Palestinian society is his willingness to risk his life. But if he's willing to trade his life for an end to the war, then I think, as Avner says, Israel might be wise to agree.
We must remember that the Hamas will not release all the hostages in one time, okay? And I believe that he will keep some of them forever, like diamonds. And that's the problem. If we will make a deal, it will be maximum 20 hostages, and then they will keep all the soldiers, they will keep all the men.
If you look at the May 31st deal that was presented as an Israel offer, it does include implicitly a return of all the hostages in exchange for a full pullout from the West Bank, including from the Gaza Strip, including the Philadelphia corridor.
But of course, the question is whether or not
that was presented as an Israeli offer.
Yeah, but the question is whether or not Hamas is ultimately truly interested in doing that, because it's the only pawn. The hostages are the only pawn that the terror group has at this point. But we have to move on to Iran.
To be clear, Israel added conditions. Israel added conditions when it looked like Hamas might agree. That's a fact.
That is true.
We cannot withdraw from the
And that is something that we're seeing the hostage families very, very upset about. Of course, we just saw news that came out today that there were signs of bullet wounds that were found in the bodies of 6 of the hostages who were recovered by the IDF earlier this week. And that, points to really the concerns of the family members that their loved ones are not going to return back alive. And that, in fact, it's not just Israeli airstrikes as Hamas has been blaming, but continued tortured at the hands of Hamas terrorists on their family members. We are turning now to Iran. Unfortunately, we have to switch topics here. Iran's hardline parliament has approved all 19 ministers of the new president's cabinet. And this is the first time in over 2 decades that a leader has been able to get all his officials through the body. Masoud Pezeshkian is, of course, celebrating the news, and joining us now to further discuss is Camelia Entikabifard, the editor-in-chief of the Independent Persian. So what does this new cabinet essentially mean for the future of the Islamic Republic's government? Isn't the supreme leader ultimately in control here of almost every decision?
is leading the control. Hi, greetings to you and the viewers. The speeches of Mr. Pezeshkian in the parliament was extremely important. He portrayed so well how the parliament, the election, the elected president, it's meaningless at this system. When he has told the parliament member that all of these 19 people of his nominee has been approved previously by Ayatollah Khamenei. He literally disarmed all of those parliament members even to not question any of his nominees as a cabinet member, which it was phenomenal. You mentioned that this is the second time, but we never had any times any other president claim such things in the parliament. And also, I believe Pezeshkian smartly tried to discharge himself from having any responsibilities for the failure of this cabinet, for any issues if in the future they were confronting, by claiming that Ayatollah Khamenei has picked, selected and approved individually each of these cabinet members.
Is this cabinet truly reformist, as we keep on seeing headlines describing?
Iranians were passed from this phase of the reformist and the conservative. I believe even during the election, purposely, these terms of the reformists used for Pezeshkian to attract some of the followers of this group. For example, they had Zarif at his campaign to attract other youths or some people who are still having faith on the reformists. And we saw that how he has been used and how he has been resigned from working with Pezeshkian as the election was over. This is just a name. Otherwise, why the number of the participants at the election wasn't higher than only 16 million, which has been voted to Pezeshkian from almost 60 million eligible Iranians.
All right, Camila, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us, giving us some of your insight. I'd like to turn back to our guests in the studio regarding Iran. We spoke briefly before, obviously, about whether or not we can be really expecting that large attack that Iran has been threatening against the state of Israel, given the ongoing issues that the regime is facing, both economically, politically, you name it. I'm interested to hear your insight, Avner.
So, from my point of view, the Iranian attack on Israel for the first time on April, it was a failure. Okay, and they know that this time we will respond and we will attack, and they don't have the ability to defend themselves. Even if the Russian gave them some systems, they will not have the ability to block our attack. And I think this is the reason that they will not do any big attack. Maybe they will do something against our embassies. They will always try to use the proxies, okay? Use and lose the proxies.
But why did they threaten it? They threatened an attack, and now they risk looking ridiculous. Why?
First of all, they are taking the time, okay? They can do it 3 months ago, from 2, 3, 4, 5 months from now, okay?
That's true.
And I think they are waiting, and look at all the forces. Look all the U.S. forces. Look all the U.S. forces around. Okay, yeah. This is the bad time for them to do something.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank both of our guests for joining us in the studio. We're moving on now to the wider Middle East. We're going to be stepping away a little bit from this discussion on Iran. Obviously, we're still waiting almost a month later for some type of larger response, but it has not come yet, and we're going to have to wait and see how that plays out. We are turning now to Afghanistan, a major win for the Taliban. The United Arab Emirates has accepted the credentials of the Taliban's ambassador, which is a major diplomatic success for the militant group, which currently rules Afghanistan but is not officially recognized as the country's legitimate government. Now, this move means that Badruddin Haqqani will become the first Taliban ambassador since one was appointed to China last December. And even though the Taliban remain isolated from the West, they have been pursuing bilateral ties with major regional powers. In fact, last week, Uzbek Prime Minister Abdullah Aripov arrived in Afghanistan in the highest level visit by a foreign official since the Taliban returned to power in Afghanistan 3 years ago. But Taliban figures have recently banned UN Special Rapporteur on Afghanistan Richard Bennett from entering the country. saying that his goal is to spread propaganda against the militant group. So we're seeing kind of mixed messaging coming from the Taliban. Joining us now is Mariam Wardak. She's a founder of the NGO Her Afghanistan. So my first question, Mariam, is why has the UAE made this decision now? Oh, it looks like we lost her. So I'm going to turn back to our guest, Dan. I'm actually interested to hear kind of your take on this decision by the UAE. What's behind this decision making?
The UAE wants to be a counterweight to, along with Saudi Arabia, to Iran in the region. They want to be seen as a player on the global stage. Remember, it was in Gulf countries that the U.S. initially, agreed to hold talks with the Taliban that led to the withdrawal, and that was under the Trump administration. Everything to do with Western countries and moderate Muslim countries' relationship with Afghanistan must be seen through the filter of the 20-year efforts to turn Afghanistan into something resembling a democracy, and if not a democracy, at least a normative country where girls are allowed to go to school. The fact that it failed so spectacularly in a rather pitiful withdrawal of U.S. and NATO forces, now the Taliban are back in power, is unbelievably dispiriting. And I believe the UAE, like others, at this point, is hoping that to engage the Taliban is really the only path left to us to try to coax them into some version of normalcy. Remember, they initially promised to not implement anti-women policies and anti-girl policies, and are now reneging on that. And they're pretty much returning to something not unlike the way they ruled Afghanistan in the 1990s. Which, of course, led to them hosting al-Qaeda and led to 9/11 and led to the war. But the failure of the war, I think, is informing what now looks like a regrettable acquiescence to the fact that the Taliban are in power.
All right, well, I'd like to turn back to our guest who is joining us on Zoom. Hopefully, we're not going to lose you this time. Mariam Wardak, the founder of the NGO Her Afghanistan. All right, so we kind of spoke about why the UAE made this decision right now, but what does it essentially mean for the Taliban as Afghanistan's ruling power and also the Afghani people as a whole? Are other countries now going to follow suit?
Well, as all of us know, the UAE's decision to accept credentials of the Taliban's ambassador is pretty much calculated move in pragmatic diplomacy. While the Taliban government is not officially recognized by most international communities, the UAE's acceptance signals a strategic attempt to position itself as a key player. This decision is influenced mainly by UAE's broader goals, including maintaining its influence in the region and securing economic interests. I'm not sure if most of you are aware, but they are the ones managing Kabul's airport at the moment. Now, all of us are quite aware that the UAE has a history of flexibility and adaptive relationships with, let's say, not so standardly acceptable communities. In addition, the UAE was the first to also have relationships with the Taliban in the 1990s, along with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan.
Now, I kind of just wanted to hear largely, the Taliban as a whole remains isolated from the West because of its oppressive policies, especially those that target women and children. At this point, 3 years since the Taliban has taken over, what is life like in Afghanistan today?
Well, I mean, you have to look at it from multiple aspects. The 3 years after the Taliban's return to power, life in Afghanistan is marked by widespread hardships and repression. And this is not only due to the Taliban, it's a continued culture, what was taking place and pretty much covered by a makeup of Western activities and facade. The Taliban's policy, particularly their restrictions on women's rights, have led to severe limitation on education, unemployment, public life for women. However, these were dire circumstances from the beginning in the provinces in the last 20 years. Now, another aspect of how the West places Afghanistan economy in a dire state is exacerbated by the international sanctions and freezing the Afghan assets abroad. So for Afghans who face extreme poverty, food insecurity, and the lack of basic services, can't be all given the responsibility to the Taliban. The country also remains largely officially isolated due to the West influence. Afghans, this development for Afghans may not immediately improve their situation. However, as the country continues to suffer from this dire circumstances, it could lead to increased international engagement, maybe potential economic relief due to UAE example.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you, Mariam, so much for joining us on Zoom. We are turning now to Tunisia. The U.S. State Department has cleared a potential foreign military sale of safe Archangel patrol boats to Tunisia worth $110 million. Now, the Tunisian government reportedly requested a number of 65-foot patrol boats and related equipment, which could be used to prevent issues like smuggling activity. But the deal isn't final. It comes at a critical time for security in the African continent, as U.S. forces are withdrawing from other areas in the continent that are further south, like Niger and Chad, which analysts say could make the entire region less safe. Now, Tunisia itself has struggled with illegal immigration routes from the rest of Africa into Europe because of its southern coast on the Mediterranean. And joining us to discuss this further is Zineb Riboua, a research fellow at the Hudson Institute. So to begin here, break down the main issues that Tunisia is facing that would require the purchase of more defensive military equipment.
Sure. So just to give some background, we should keep in mind that Tunisia is a transit hub for migrants across the continent, and Tunisia's maritime security forces have been under immense pressure, given the wars and conflicts that are infecting the Sahel region, especially in Mali, Niger, and Sudan, and the weak border security with Libya have made Tunisia even more fragile when it comes to countering human trafficking. And issues regarding refugees who are fleeing violent conflicts. And just to give a number, since the Sudan civil war, more than 12 million Sudanese people have been displaced, and the International Rescue Committee said that it's the largest displacement crisis in the world. So for Tunisia, this procurement, which is as you've mentioned, a $110 million deal for patrol boats, is very important.
What does this deal say about how much the United States wants to be involved in protecting Tunisia and perhaps its changing interests in the region as a whole?
Well, I think we should frame it this way, that part of NATO's core tasks is to preserve the security of the Mediterranean Sea, which it sees part of the NATO's southern neighborhoods. And Tunisia, in this regard, has a special status, like Morocco, Jordan, and Egypt, which is the status of a non-NATO ally. Which comes with benefits regarding defense trade and security cooperation with the United States. So even if the United States signaled that it's slowly withdrawing from the Middle East and North Africa, at least when it comes to extensive military involvement, I think it will still maintain its efforts of preserving freedom of navigation and countering terrorism, etc., in the Mediterranean area. So I think this is how we should frame it when it comes to U.S. involvement.
Well, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us and of course, kind of breaking this down. Very interesting to see how Tunisia is going to be dealing with the migrant crisis in the coming days. We're going to turn now to the economy here in Israel. As the war grinds on, Israel's economy is suffering, and leading economists are warning of implications for the future. Take a look.
Nearly 11 months since October 7, and alongside the suffering from the war between Hamas and Israel, Israel's economy is badly affected as well. The Institute for National Security Studies, INSS, in Israel has revealed that the country is currently at a pivotal juncture concerning the ongoing conflict in Gaza and its confrontations with what's called the axis of resistance. Its report emphasizes that every decision made regarding the future will have considerable economic implications. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has tried to allay concerns by saying the damage is only temporary, but the war has hurt thousands of small businesses and compromised international trust in Israel's economy.
We did consider at one point closing for a few months because that might have been, from a purely economic way, a method of stemming some of the losses, but of course that would mean sacking all the staff. It would have meant letting the gardeners, which we've developed over 120 years, go fallow. It would have meant a loss of reputation.
3 of the biggest credit ratings agencies downgraded Israel's rating from A+ to A, also kept outlook negative, meaning a further drop is possible. Leading economists say a ceasefire is the only way to stop the decline.
A regular year, we are growing at a rate of 3.7%, which means that if you want it in dollar terms, we are going to lose this year in GDP $14 billion. But it's only in GDP, we're losing much more. But if we be stubborn and continue the war until I don't know what, then I think we will not recover.
The United States, Qatar, and Egypt are straining to seal a deal that would bring an end to the war and exchange scores of Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners, but success has proved elusive.
Well, on that note, if you feel like it's impossible to find an affordable flight out of or to Israel, you are not alone in that sentiment. Air travel has been repeatedly shaken by the war in Gaza and spiking regional tensions, and many foreign airlines have recently halted their flights, causing prices to go up. Well, now the government has gotten involved, and Israel's national airline El Al has announced fixed ticket costs to 4 different locations after being accused of actually hiking prices up and exploiting the war to make a profit. El Al is now offering $199 round-trip flights to Cyprus, $299 round-trip flights to Athens and Greece, and also $349 round-trip flights to both Vienna and Dubai. The idea is to provide a more affordable option to Israelis who are attempting to either come back home or leave the country and amid this dire security situation. And from these locations, they can find more flight options to other countries as well. It's important to note that these prices are only going to be available until the end of the year. And when I checked the El Al website, I also saw that they were not available every single day, so also less flights as well. But joining us now to further discuss this is our economic expert, Alex Coleman. Alex, give us a sense of just how much flights have gone up since the start of the war.
Well, it's incredible because we all remember when prices were very low. And in all the routes where El Al is basically a monopoly, if you're talking about New York, tickets are costing something like $1,600. And people are crazy because they say we never saw these prices. And in fact, some of these lines which are operated by other companies, such as United, the price if you buy it not from El Al is significantly lower. So people in Israel really freaked out, in particular because during the COVID period, the Israeli government supported El Al with millions of dollars, which it's not going to get back. El Al just had the 2 most profitable quarters in its history, and it's not paying taxes because it lost money in the previous quarters. So people are really, really, really nervous. So the Minister of Economics met with the CEO of El Al, and he scolded her, which I usually completely ignore, but that's why she came up with these 4, that's the way it's presented, that's why she came up with these 4 packages. Now, these packages are not such incredible prices because they're basically the high prices that we saw recently, so it's not something that you can... Right.
I mean, a flight to Larnaca in Cyprus is typically less than $100 one way. So
exactly. So these prices are not something. They're not bargain basement prices that you say, "Wow, we cannot believe that they're so low." They're not.
Right. You know, airlines like El Al have been accused of exploiting the war. What other industries have also been profiting during this time?
Well, we've seen this with people have been dislocated from the south and the north. And when we see people who are renting them apartments, they know how much money the government is offering. So rents have gone through the roof without any justification. I mean, you're talking about dumps charging tens of thousands of shekels, prices which are completely do not make any sense, just taking advantage. That's profiteering if you want. You can see this, I think, all over because everything has gone up. Real estate has gone up significantly.
one of the things that companies like to do, I mean, let's be honest, if I were the CEO of El Al, I would also ask myself, how can I benefit as much as possible? Because that's what you put somebody to be a CEO on the job, even though it's, from a moral point perspective, it's really ugly. We've seen this with house prices. Right. Housing prices have gone through the roof. And usually what they like to do when there is some root of reality, for instance, Turkey has boycotted Israel, and much of the cement and steel and glass come from there. So they jump on the bandwagon and they raise the prices even more.
I mean, obviously, it's very unfortunate when it comes to airlines. There's just, really a security need to make sure that there are affordable options for Israelis to enter and exit the country. So, hopefully this is kind of a positive step forward, and that people are going to be able to take advantage of that who have not been able to afford flights so far. But Alex, thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, that is it for now for Middle East Now. We have run out of time, but don't worry, we'll be back again next week. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and we'll see you next time.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Mi persona está viendo eso y bueno, vamos a tener que llevar a un lugar donde pueda estar, donde sea su ámbito. Bueno, aquí nos han repugnado. Está lastimado aquí.
No sé qué me lastimó.
Aquí te dan el chopa para ver. Está lastimado, ¿no? Aquí también se puede.
Israel and Hezbollah step up their air attacks across the northern border. The U.S. moves another aircraft carrier into the region to keep Iran in check. We'll have the latest. Autopsy results show gunfire wounds on the bodies of the 6 hostages recovered from Gaza, suggesting they died from Hamas fire and not Israeli airstrikes. We'll take a closer look. The parents of hostage Hersh Goldberg Poland lead the Democratic National Convention in chants of "Bring them home." As out in the streets of Chicago, anti-Israel protesters clash with police. We'll go live to our reporter at the DNC. This is the rundown on I-24 News. I'm Khaled Ben-David. Spiraling tensions between Israel and Hezbollah are showing no signs of losing momentum following another day of intense cross-border fire across the northern border. Meanwhile, a second American aircraft carrier, the U.S. Abraham Lincoln, arrived in Middle East waters last night, escorted by guided missile destroyers. This, according to U.S. Central Command. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin ordered the Lincoln to transit from the Pacific Fleet to the region earlier this month, as the Biden administration prepares to defend Israel against any attack from Iran and its proxies. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran has more in this report.
The damage from an Israeli airstrike on the southern Lebanese town of El Khiam overnight. It was part of what the IDF called extensive airstrikes against Hezbollah facilities in 10 separate areas in southern Lebanon. The widespread strikes came in response to a Hezbollah barrage of 50 rockets the previous day at the northern town of Katzrin that caused significant damage and wounded an Israeli man. That didn't stop Hezbollah from continuing to launch dozens of rockets throughout Thursday, causing minor damage to some communities and IDF bases.
I'm here at the site of rocket impact near a school in the town. This was a rocket that didn't cause any injuries. As you can see, firefighters are at the scene.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited on Wednesday the Ramat David Air Base near Haifa, where Netanyahu hinted at Israel's offensive capabilities.
I'm here at the Air Force Base to closely monitor our preparation against threats from both near and far. We are ready for any scenario, both on defense and offense. The Air Force is our iron fist that knows how to strike at the soft underbelly of our enemies. It proves it time and time again. And if necessary, we will prove it again, and with even greater force.
With spiraling violence between Israel and Hezbollah showing no sign of losing momentum, a second American aircraft carrier arrived in the Middle East on Wednesday, a signal to Hezbollah and Iran. The USS Abraham Lincoln and accompanying destroyers arrived after the U.S. Defense Secretary ordered the strike group to accelerate its speed amid fears of a regional conflict. It's worth noting that the carrier, equipped with F-35 fighter jets, is originally designated to the Pacific Fleet, a sign that the U.S. sees the Middle East as the current #1 biggest threat, and one miscalculation away from erupting.
And for more, let's go to northern Israel and our correspondent there, Balir Sladin. And Balir reports the Israel Security Cabinet meeting. Surely the escalation in the north has to be concerned as, again, we see this intensification of fire there across the border.
Yes, yet another day of cross-border fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. Hezbollah, until now, they took responsibility for 11 attacks on various locations on the Israeli north. Mainly, they targeted Kiryat Shmona. Apparently, 2 missiles fell in open areas there. Didn't cause any damage or casualties, but 2 missiles that were fired from the area or close to Metula, north of Kiryat Shmona, caused damage to 2 homes there. These are not the first homes that are damaged in Metula. Apparently, it would be the most the city that or the town that was hit the most since October 8th when it comes to hitting homes in the Israeli north. Now, this comes after an overnight strikes by the Israeli Air Force. Apparently, Hezbollah infrastructure in 10 locations were targeted, and for the first time in Adalon, north of Tyre, in southern Lebanon. So munition storages and, of course, military buildings that are used by Hezbollah were struck by the Air Force. Now, after the meeting that the Prime Minister Netanyahu held with the head of the local council in Katsrin, the city that was hit yesterday by at least two or three actually Katyusha rockets, and one person was wounded. An announcement from the Prime Minister's office says that they will announce the city of Katsrin and also other towns as a confrontation line cities, which means that now it's considered a confrontation line with all of the meanings of that announcement. Now, this is very important because we are less than 10 days away from the beginning of the school year, and of course at least the towns and cities that haven't been evacuated are hoping to open this school year safely, something that is still not clear right now, but at least we are saying that the government is taking action, and the military is putting more pressure on Hezbollah by these overnight strikes that are happening for the third night in a row. Khaled.
Right, taking action, more security measures for towns like Katsrin, more aid, but not talk yet, is there, of evacuating those towns? Well, the Katsrin is the town on the Golan, some of those kibbutzim and moshavim there, to evacuate them as they've done in other towns in the north.
For now, no evacuation orders, and I guess that many in the Israeli government think that even the evacuation orders for cities, big cities like Kiryat Shmona and others, were actually wrong, because it gave Hezbollah some sort of an achievement, and of course it puts a lot of pressure on the Israeli public services to put these 80,000 or more people in safe places around the country, and of course to deal with the children, everyone that is at school from these families. That's something that puts a lot of pressure on the Israeli public services, and that's why some people, even inside the government, see the initial evacuation orders not to cities like Margaliot, of course, which is right on the border, but at least Kiryat Shmona, for example, something that was wrong. For now, at least, the city of Katsrin, as we said, even though that it's now officially a confrontation line city, but no evacuation order.
All right, I think a town of Katsrin would be more accurate there, but it is a sizable community there on the Golan, the major community there on the Golan. Belir Sladin, thank you for that. And with us in studio, we have Reserves IDF Brigadier General Israel Relic Shafir. He's the former commander of the Tel Nof Air Force Base, and of course a former Top Gun pilot for the IAF. Ariel Osron, our Middle East correspondent, and Nicole Tzedek, our reporter, who's also reported quite a bit from up north. Maybe, Relic, tell us about the capabilities of the Abraham Lincoln and the meaning of that coming in to those Mideast waters as a potential deterrent, for example, against Iran.
An aircraft carrier does not arrive by itself. It's always a group of ships, some in submarines, who are actually protecting the carrier with anti-submarine warfare, electronic warfare ships, supply, and so on. The ship itself is loaded with squadrons of F-35s and F-18s, ready for air-to-air and air-to-ground attacks. The submarines around them have Tomahawk missiles, and they are poised to be used either for defense or offense in a very short notice. So they loiter around this part of the Middle East, close to the borders of Syria and Lebanon, so as to pose a threat to Hezbollah if need be. Same thing goes for the Fifth Fleet at the Straits of Hormuz, with the carriers and the submarines there and the ground F-22s that were deployed. So A lot of the U.S. force is in this area to actually actuate the word "don't" to the Iranians and to Hezbollah, and also assure Israel that it will stand by it for defense needs.
Right. Deterrent to Hezbollah maybe for a big attack, but maybe not for an escalation of the type we've seen, for example, in their firing missile rockets at civilian communities on the Golan, something that they haven't done very often. And we saw how devastating that could happen, for example, in Majd al-Shams.
Yeah, as Relic said, this is basically the personification of the word "don't," just in the multi-billion-dollar version of it. But really, if we're looking at the aim of bringing this second carrier, which is intended to replace the current carrier, the Roosevelt, the Theodore Roosevelt, but for a while they will be together, right. And that is also part of the statement. At the end of the day, yes, these ships are not intended to stop the current cross-border fire between Israel and Hezbollah, but to prevent a larger escalation, to prevent basically the threshold to cross the threshold into a regional war, because on these ships you have not only 4 flight squadrons, but you also have 1,500 Marines, and these combat strike groups, strike teams that are on this carrier and the accompanying destroyers. These are indeed offensive weapons, as Relic described, not only defensive, but offensive weapons that can really signal deterrence. And so basically the goal is to not prevent further escalation, but they're not intended to stop the current uptick in tensions.
Right, you're certainly not going to see Marines in Lebanon anytime soon, given the history there. Nicole, as Belia mentioned, the government calling Katsrin, these communities, frontline communities, basically, and they'll get some aid, but not evacuating them, because as he said, and you spend time in those communities there, maybe even though lives may have been saved, the message, the political message he was talking about to Hezbollah, but also maybe to the Israeli public, being sent by the evacuation of, for example, a town like Kiryat Shmona.
And that's been the catch-22 really since the beginning of this war, because when many of these towns were evacuated since Hezbollah got involved on October 8th, no one saw that that would just be the beginning, and every day, every month, these escalations would continue. And so now when you talk about these escalations, these daily cross-border attacks, they are already so much greater than what we saw on October 8th. But now this has become the new reality, the new norm up there. But these people, when they first evacuated their homes, they did not think that they would be living in hotels for 10 months now with absolutely no end in sight. And so that's what the government is now struggling to do, because on the one hand, you have the duty to protect your civilians and keep them safe. And they think right now the best way to do that is by evacuating them. But at what time can you ensure their safety to make sure that they are able to get back there? And that's really the main question on the northern front, because how can you continue with this threat right across your border, and that threat being Hezbollah?
Right.
I just want to note that another goal of this, of bringing this carrier, is to enable the current situation that Israel's in. It's bracing for a large-scale attack, but there are no changes in the guidelines, because the goal of the IDF is for Israelis to maintain their daily routine without having to succumb to this psychological warfare, the pressure of the waiting game that Iran is trying to employ on Israelis. And so bringing this second carrier allows Israel to enjoy this current, it could be a false sense of security, but at least a temporary sense of security that the IDF is working very hard for Israelis to maintain as it braces for this retaliation.
No, there have been consequences for Israel for international air travel, and we're going to talk about that a little later in the program. But let's turn now our attention to a front that maybe does not get enough attention given all that's been going on along the borders, and that's the West Bank, which does continue to simmer, with the IDF carrying out an extended anti-terror operation in Tulkarem over 14 hours. That included an airstrike that the army said killed 3 terrorists. Forces there also arresting 40 terror suspects and destroying 2 laboratories used to make explosives. And in another development, police detained 4 Israelis living in West Bank communities suspected of involvement in last week's rampage in the village of Jit, in which dozens of settlers torched Palestinian-owned homes and cars there. The Israel police had come under criticism for not arresting any of those involved in that incident, which also drew international criticism. And Relic, I want to ask you again about the use of air power in the West Bank, which has now become almost standard at a time when some of us remember when that would have been exceptional or almost, I'm not going to say unthinkable, but certainly sounded unlikely you would be doing airstrikes in the West Bank as frequently as you might do in Gaza.
Well, the advantage of using UAVs with a very small munition, something like 10 kilos of munitions, that can loiter around for hours above the area and see what's happening and be in contact with the ground forces. And every time somebody hides behind a corner, they can actually send the scene to the commanders on the ground and, if need be, deliver ammunition to take those out. This is a force multiplier in the sense of being able to reach the terrorists much faster and decrease the susceptibility of our fighters to enemy fire. So this is a real force multiplier in this area. Whether in the long run it is something that is sustainable civil-wise is another different question that we'll put aside at this time. But militarily speaking, it is a lot of help to the ground forces that are sometimes cornered in all kinds of places, in Kasbahs and so on. And by using the UAVs and the cooperation with the Shabak, the IDF, and the Air Force, it is a real force multiplier.
Right, and those developments in UAVs have made possible these sort of pinpoint strikes, as you say, in these sort of civilian areas that you have in the West Bank. Nicole, just on the arrest of these 4 settlers, Israeli settler communities, this is something the government, the police have been criticized with, and maybe, of course, we could bring up the fact that the man in charge of the police, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, has given ambivalent comments on what some have called vigilante actions. But there's no question Israel has, for example, had international condemnation. I'm not just talking about in the media, but from governments to make some kind of action to rein in that kind of behavior in the West Bank.
That's what we're really seeing from many of the different international bodies right now, as they continue to see, it seems like an uptick in this type of settler violence. And so on the one hand, you do see the opportunity of Israel to say we are detaining some of these and trying to do justice. However, from these international bodies that are condemning what we're seeing happening in the West Bank and the violence between the Palestinians and the Israeli settlers, they're saying it's getting out of control and it's going unchecked at this point, because there are time and time again that the international bodies do point to that say so many of these times these Israeli settlers are being, quote unquote, off the hook for some of their actions. And so this is an opportunity for Israel to say, look, we are investigating, we are doing our due diligence and really trying to show that the justice system does work. But at the same time, some of these international bodies are saying it's too little too late, and it's still running so rampant that something more needs to be done than just showing 4 people as an example in the media.
Right. Well, international bodies includes the U.S. government, which has taken the unprecedented action, yes, of sanctioning Israeli citizens, these settler activists living in the West Bank.
All these actions are happening under the table, or sometimes we see a hint to this. But come November 3rd, and I think we will see a change in the U.S. policy.
Well, let's not jump ahead to U.S. politics yet.
Yeah. It's U.S. politics and Israeli politics.
Yeah.
And at this time, the ultra-right parties in the government are holding a lot of Israelis, I think 70–80% of Israelis, by the throat by doing and condoning these kind of activities where they're not condoned by the Israeli public, let alone the Western world.
All right, well, we'll see. We'll leave aside what may happen in November in the U.S. for now. We'll get to that later as well. Now, funerals were held over the past 2 days for the 6 Israeli hostages whose bodies were recovered by the IDF from inside a Hamas terror tunnel in Gaza. Now, Hamas claims they were killed as a result of Israeli bombing of the tunnels, a claim that was cast in doubt today by the results of Israeli autopsies performed on the bodies. Now, preliminary findings indicated that all 6 suffered from gunshot wounds at close range, suggested they were in fact executed by their captors. Tellingly, there were no gunshot wounds among the terrorists killed in the same tunnel, indicating that the hostages were not killed during the rescue operation that recovered their bodies. And in another consequence of October 7th, Major General Aharon Haliva, who formally resigned as head of the IDF's Military Intelligence Directorate, once again claimed responsibility for his personal failures on that fateful day and called on other leaders to do the same. But it's been 321 days since the massacre took place, and most of the current government officials have yet to be held accountable for those security failures. Anna Tzedek has more.
More than 10 months since the deadliest attack on the Jewish state, and the question of accountability is still weighing on Israeli leaders.
On that Saturday, we failed to fulfill the most important mission which we are tasked with, providing a warning for war. The top responsibility for the failures of the Military Intelligence Directorate is on me.
In his last speech as head of the IDF's Military Intelligence Directorate, Major General Aharon Haliva not only reiterated his personal responsibility for October 7th, but called on other leaders to step up as well.
Taking responsibility and setting a personal example is a core value of the IDF and in leadership in general. Taking responsibility is not words, it must be actions. My decision to end my role and resign from the IDF is the norm in which I was educated.
Haliva reiterated calls for a state commission of inquiry into the failures that led to the war, a request Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government still doesn't want to see, as most of them have yet to take responsibility for the October 7th failures and argue an investigation should take place after the war is complete. It's become a political issue inside Israel, which was discussed during an independent civilian commission of inquiry. The mother of hostage Matan Zangauker said it's this fear of political consequence that's also holding up a hostage release deal.
I would like to reveal to this committee that when I sat down with the head of the Mossad, David Barnea, and received an update on the negotiations, I was told by the head of Mossad, and I quote, "Dear Einav, unfortunately, in the current political constellation, a deal for the release of abductees is not possible." As soon as the head of the Mossad tells me such a statement, even though I know he is not a political person, he is the head of an intelligence organization. I know that this statement was made so that I could resonate with it in the public sphere.
The Mossad has since denied Zangauker's statements. But while Benjamin Netanyahu's government is trying to push off a state inquiry until after the war with Hamas, 109 hostages are still in Gaza. There's no clear end to the war in sight, and no official investigation into how all of this happened to make sure it can never happen again.
Relic, there are some who said General Haliva should have resigned well before this, and along with other top IDF commanders and some top political leaders as well. And there are others who argue in the middle of a war, you can't have that kind of process. It could have a demoralizing effect. It could disrupt the chain of command while Israel is in the midst of the war. As a brigadier general, what's your view on that?
Well, it's a balancing act because on the one hand, the failure that we're alluding to, somebody needs to take hold of this responsibility. And the reason that they should remove themselves, either politicians or military persons, is that their decisions are influenced by the fact that they want to change the history, and so their decisions are not straightforward. And that is the reason why they should resign, the politicians and the military people. The other hand is that when you're in the midst of a fight, unless the failure is such that it's gross negligence, as we might say, then you're not taking risks. If you're a command general on the battleground that needs to take immediate decisions and can't loiter around. And so this is maybe also a note to those who decide how to suit commanders or generals to the different areas, especially in this area where the chief of intelligence should be somebody who can listen to the people at the lower echelons, which is the major failure in this particular case.
And on the hostages, we should note, Ariel, the negotiations go on. An Israeli team, the negotiators are heading to Cairo now.
They have actually reached Cairo. Mossad chief David Barnea and Ronen Bar, the head of the Shin Bet. Apparently there's secret talks that have already resumed in Cairo between Israel and Egypt, specifically on the sticking points of the Philadelphia corridor, because while it appears that the main dispute is obviously sticking point between Israel and Hamas, but over the past 24 hours, it really has emerged that there's also a growing dispute between Israel and Egypt, one of the mediators, regarding Israeli presence on the Philadelphia corridor. That's the 9-mile-long border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. Now, on this issue, the Israeli Israeli negotiators have proposed different alternatives to even gradual presence of Israeli forces. Egypt has so far declined any proposal that will see Israeli forces stay in the Philadelphia corridor. So indeed a major sticking point.
Amazing. And of course, Hamas totally rejects any IDF presence there. Please stay with us. We are going out for a brief break, but we'll have lots more when the rundown is back.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Back to the rundown on I-24 News, and let's turn now to the U.S. and the Democratic National Convention, which last night in Chicago featured some rousing speeches from the likes of Oprah Winfrey and the vice presidential candidate Tim Walz. But one of the most moving moments of the evening came when John Poland and Rachel Goldberg, whose son Hirsch is being held captive in Gaza, took to the podium and called for the release of him and all the hostages. Jody Natelovitz has the details.
Day 3 of the Democratic National Convention was a dynamic one, featuring a performance from Stevie Wonder, an Oprah Winfrey surprise appearance, and some of the most problematic issues brought up by speakers thus far. Capping off the night was a speech from Tim Walz as he accepted the party's vice presidential nomination. He spoke of his progressive policies, his admiration for Kamala Harris, his wife's infertility issues, and his love for his family.
It's the honor of my life to accept your nomination for Vice President of the United States, and I love you.
Most Democrats have avoided the subject up till now, but by the penultimate day, protests against the U.S. support for Israel's war in Gaza began to overshadow the convention.
And our message is to tell the Democratic Party, to tell the DNC, not in our name, not with our tax dollars, not with U.S.-made weapons. Enough is enough. An arms embargo must be imposed against the apartheid regime of Israel.
Thousands marched towards the convention center following a night of police clashes outside Chicago's Israeli consulate.
American people are calling for a ceasefire and an end to the genocide, an end to aid to Israel, and we are complicit in genocide, unfortunately, and we're calling for an end to all of that.
Inside, however, Rachel Goldberg and John Poland received a standing ovation and chants of "Bring them home" as they took the stage. Their son Hirsch was one of 250 Israelis taken hostage into the Gaza Strip 10 months ago.
This is a political convention, but needing our only son and all of the cherished hostages home is not a political issue. It is a humanitarian issue.
Democrats have been divisive on the topic, splitting between Palestinian and Israeli causes.
In a competition of pain, there are no winners.
The speech even earned applause from some of the most pro-Palestinian House members, proving to be a rare unifying moment for the party.
Nicole, as was noted there, some strong presentations, especially by Tim Walz, speaking about his family. But of course, for our audience, that presentation by the Goldberg Poland. So have been frequent guests on the program. A very moving moment, and maybe something the Democrats felt they had to do at a certain point, bring a hostage family up, given, of course, some of the flack they've been taking on the issue of support for Israel.
Everyone in that audience was moved, because how could you not be after hearing from that family for 320 days while they were there? At that point, had been vocally fighting to bring their son home. And so there was not a dry eye in the audience. And this does show still how the Democratic National Convention is trying to pander to both audiences and trying to also mark the difference from what is happening outside the streets of the DNC, quite literally outside the convention versus inside the convention. They're trying to say that this is the small minority of the Democratic Party that is taking place, the ultra-left, the uncommitted delegates even, who have now been, I don't want to say outraged, but angered by the fact that the Hirsch family was able to speak at the DNC, yet now they're claiming, why wasn't there any Palestinian representation allowed to speak? This uncommitted delegation had put in a request to the Harris administration to speak at the DNC. It was denied, and after Hirsch's parents were able to speak, they then held a sit-in outside of the DNC, stating that this isn't fair. There needs to be room for both voices inside the Democratic National Convention. But that's not necessarily what we're seeing, and I do want to commend the DNC also for taking the advantage to show this message of humanity inside the DNC, because that, at the end of the day, is also what the Democratic Party as a whole is trying to do, is show the humanity of this war in a whole, and that's really where they're trying to pander to both sides, both their Jewish American voters, as well as showing the humanity that they also do care, and they're trying to push for a ceasefire inside Gaza as well.
Right. We should note that the Goldberg poll and spoke about the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza as well. Now, Ralek, I can go to your point about the surging Democrats, or so it appears, or certainly it appears at the very least it's going to be a close election. The Democrats are likely to come out of this quite strong, and that is going to have maybe some impact on the thinking here and actions here in Israel, for example, of those in government that might have anticipated a clear victory by Donald Trump in November going against an aging Joe Biden.
Well, let's remember that the Jews in the United States vote about 70% Democrats and 30% Republicans. So the Jewish vibe and the Jewish value system is certainly along the Democrats rather than the Republicans. That has been that way ever since the Second World War, and it's probably going to stay that way. I think both the president and the vice president up to this time have voiced their opinions very strongly in favor of Israel and the parallel value system that we have. Certainly not with Hamas and Daesh, who are terrorists, and certainly not with those who attune to terror such as Hamas. So there's no symmetry, and that is the reason why the DNC did not have Palestinians bring the Palestinian cause. Right. And let's not forget that. There's no symmetry. The U.S. does not show symmetry, and even though some would like to present Donald Trump as siding more with Israel than the Democrats, that had not been the case with the Abraham Accords, whose part of the deal was a Palestinian state.
Right. Well, it certainly is going to be interesting. We should note Kamala Harris will be speaking in the early hours of this morning, and we're going to see. She's been very careful and has not generally addressed the Israel-Gaza conflict or Israel-Hamas war in the last, since basically more or less getting the nod to be the nominee. It's going to be interesting to see if she's going to even mention it this evening. And, of course, if so, how she's going to address it. But I'm pretty sure it's not going to be a big part of any speech she makes. Now, bring it back to Israel. Among the casualties of the Gaza war is the Israel economy, which has suffered a number of blows lately. Reduced growth figures and forecasts, a downgrade in its credit rating by Fitch's and some of the other agencies, and reports painting a worrying picture of what the future holds if the fighting continues. Nasser Nasri takes a closer look at those troubling trends.
Nearly 11 months since October 7, and alongside the suffering from the war between Hamas and Israel, Israel's economy is badly affected as well. The Institute for National Security Studies, INSS, in Israel has revealed that the country is currently at a pivotal juncture concerning the ongoing conflict in Gaza and its confrontations with what's called the axis of resistance. Its report emphasizes that every decision made regarding the future will have considerable economic implications. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has tried to allay concerns by saying the damage is only temporary, but the war has hurt thousands of small businesses and compromised international trust in Israel's economy.
We did consider at one point closing for a few months because that might have been, from a purely economic way, a method of stemming some of the losses, but of course that would mean sacking all the staff. It would have meant letting the gardens, which we've developed over 120 years, go fallow. It would have meant a loss of reputation.
3 of the biggest credit ratings agencies downgraded Israel's rating from A+ to A, also kept outlook negative, meaning a further drop is possible. Leading economists say a ceasefire is the only way to stop the decline.
A regular year, we are growing at a rate of 3.7%, which means that if you want it in dollar terms, we are going to lose this year in GDP $14 billion. But it's only in GDP, we're losing much more. But if we be stubborn and continue the war until I don't know what, then I think we will not recover.
The United States, Qatar, and Egypt are straining to seal a deal that would bring an end to the war and exchange scores of Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners, but success has proved elusive.
Now, despite all that bad economic news, there is one Israeli company that's making a record profit since October 7th, and that is El Al, Israel's national air carrier. Now, with most other airlines cutting back or even canceling their flights to Israel, El Al has been enjoying a near monopoly on many routes to and from the country, with some accusing it of exploiting the situation by price gouging. Perhaps to answer that and also ensure that Israelis do have the opportunity of at least getting out from or coming back to the country, El Al this week announced fixed prices to 4 destinations for the rest of the year. These are going to be round-trip tickets to Larnaca in Cyprus, which will be $199, to Athens, $299, to Vienna, $349, and to Dubai, $349. Well, joining us now for more is Mark Feldman. He is the director of Deason House, which deals with travel, and he joins us from Jerusalem. And Mark, are we going to commend El Al for fixing these prices and helping Israelis, at least toward the end of the year, get to and from their spots in the world? Or are we going to note that they only did this after they were called to the carpet by the economy minister, Nir Barkat, basically threatened by them if they didn't do something about their prices?
Too little, too late. The destinations you named are so innocuous, do not really deal with the problems at hand. You have to understand, 3 weeks ago, a Hamas terrorist was assassinated in a Tehran hotel room. Immediately, almost all of the airlines that had resumed their operations to Israel pulled out. The Americans, the United, the Deltas, gone. The Lufthansa, the Swiss, gone. Which means tens of thousands of Israelis were stranded. Now, it's not a question of price gouging. El Al has been flying to New York, for example, or to Paris, 5 flights a day. This is high season. This is August. Those that could take time to get away from our wars went away. They're stuck. The planes have been sold out, and trying to get back this month, as many Israelis want to do, is near impossible. So it's not a question of price gouging. What Minister Barkat forced El Al and Arkia and Israel to do was to throw a bone. So if you can somehow find a ticket to Athens or Larnaca or Dubai, El Al will bring you back home. But to get to those places, it's adding thousands of dollars to the tickets that you already had. So it really is basic supply and demand. I don't accuse El Al of price gouging because they don't have extra planes. It's not like the planes that were sitting in the desert during COVID that all of a sudden they're
Well, when I'm talking about prices, I don't just mean in the last month, Mark. There are those who have been flying over the past 6 months. I happen to be one of them for personal reasons, in which found that the prices, El Al, it's all there in the balance sheet. El Al has had a record quarter. Its most profitable quarter ever, basically. And yes, to some degree, it's helped by circumstances. But at the same time, people are wondering if it's excessive.
Look, it's supply and demand. They have an 82% market share because there's so few airlines flying. Cathay Pacific pulled out completely. American Airlines pulled out completely. Air Canada pulled out completely. So you have still a large amount of North Americans who want to come visit family here or delegations, and a far greater number of Israelis going abroad. So the numbers have gone up easily 30 to 40%. But you have to understand the planes are filling full. I would imagine, Caleb, when you flew, there wasn't 20 or 30 empty seats on your plane, which means people are buying these planes. People are buying these flights. We have a lot of clients who are deciding to vote with their tush, and they're spending the night in Europe. They actually decide they're not going to pay these astronomical fees. They're going to fly to Europe, deal with the burden, spend the night there, and go the next day to save a few $100s. But it's hard to say. Prices have gone up, but that's what lack of competition does. You don't have competition. raise the prices.
So Mark, let me ask you, because there was an executive for one of the local airlines, not El Al, one of the smaller ones here, that basically was quoted in the Hebrew press today as saying he's doubting that a lot of these airlines will come back even after the war. Who even knows when you can call a war? So it may be this is a situation Israel's going to have to live, or Israelis are going to have to live with a long time. So what could be done? What should be done? What could be done to alleviate the situation, even down the line here?
Look, we have to assume, unfortunately, that this situation will continue for weeks or months, or, God forbid, even longer. So the question is, how do we woo these foreign carriers came in? Why was United flying here until 3 weeks ago? What changed to make the flight crew afraid to sleep over, which they were doing since April, and stalled out? It's part of the government and the Ministry of Transportation to go to these airlines and ask, why won't you come back? British Airways and Air France are flying here. Why are they flying here and not Lufthansa and Swiss? There's a lot of people out there that have to ask these questions. It's not a question of coming to the El Al's or the Arkias or Israel's. They don't have more planes. It's how do we entice the foreign carriers who were here to come back here? Does that mean we have to maybe give some sort of compensation? Maybe. But standing pat is going to be disastrous for the Israeli consumer. They're going to end up paying much, much more. And those that have to fly are forced to pay outrageous prices, Caleb. There is no short-term solution.
All right. Stay with us, Mark. I want to ask Relek Shafir, of course, a veteran pilot, and I'm going to assume a lot of your former colleagues in the Air Force are making a very nice living now with El Al, either as pilots or in its management. Is it fair, what we're saying about the situation? I mean, El Al is benefiting from... The argument has always been El Al disproves it, that El Al, Israel needs a national carrier because other airlines will bail in security situations.
Well, you know, if we look along the years, we would see that El Al were always on the verge, as most airlines are, of profitability. And the competition between the airlines and the fact that El Al became private meant that they're very short on profits. So obviously they want to make money when the demand is high, so that they can keep on going when the demand goes down. Plus the fact that they're overextending their pilots. And when pilots fly more than their usual share, they cost more, and as everybody who works in this industry. I'll also remind ourselves that Delta, United, and American Airlines were saved by the administration during COVID, and American Airlines basically went broke. Had not they been saved, we're talking about billions and billions of dollars. Just like El Al here, were saved during COVID. Right. So the trend, and if you'll find the same in the United States, make money when you can, so that you can you will not suffocate when you can't, weather or whatever is permitting. But I think probably El Al just played their hands too much, and the public anger that arose forced them to find some kind of solutions and to make it available for the passengers to reach some hubs, to change to planes going where they're going, because usually El Al flies to major hubs, Vienna, Munich, Frankfurt, London,
and Dubai for Asia.
Yeah, so that the passengers can go to other places. That's why it's important to make them reach those hubs for a fair price.
Right. Mark, let me go back to you on that, because El Al it's got a bit of it may be in terms of how it's profits, this may be the golden era, but in terms of maybe the public will or public attitude toward it, maybe not so much. So how should El Al... You mentioned the fact that what the government has to do with the international airlines, but what about El Al?
Want government interference, okay, in the airline industry. This populist thing saying, oh, the sky is falling, El Al is making so much money. I understand the anger. I understand the wrath, okay? We're talking about $175 million. Yes, that is a large amount of money in relative terms. In other terms, $175 million, El Al's long-term debt as he just mentioned, okay, is over $900 million. So one of the reasons that El Al is not paying taxes on this profit is they have losses going back years and years and years, far in excess of the profits they've made the last quarter, this quarter, and the next quarter as well. I understand it doesn't look good. And I think that El Al has been trying very, very hard of flying victims of terrors and flying soldiers and doing as much as they can. But again, it's not a PR nightmare. But again, when you have populist politicians trying to make some points by saying, we must, take care of these prices, we must lower them, we must go back, and we pick up a few lousy places, it doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't do anything whatsoever. Opening 80,000 seats at these 4 destinations, which are not, as just mentioned, common destinations like a London or a Rome or Paris, doesn't do.
To be fair, Relic said they were hub destinations. People could fly to them and transfer to planes. Yes, at added cost, but still have the possibility of getting out of the country or coming back if they have to.
But the United and Deltas don't necessarily to North America fly from those hubs.
Right, okay.
So that you can take me to Vienna is great, but from Vienna, what do I have? From Dubai, what do I have? In other words, I don't need El Al to open up Dubai. I've got the 2 Arab airlines flying here every single day. Emirates and Fly Dubai is here. I don't need El Al. El Al to the Far East.
Right, all right.
Isn't competing. It's a very complicated issue, and populist outcries is not going to solve the situation.
All right. No, clearly not. But there is a situation that we have to deal with. I have to mention I've flown almost a half a dozen times with El Al over the past 7 months for personal reasons. And I have to say, at the very least, it cost, but it got me where I had to go. Mark Feldman of Dees In-House, thank you for that. Now, complaining about El Al is almost a national sport, like the national carry. It's a national sport in Israel. But we're going to move on from that because we do have some other news. And unfortunately, there is some breaking news out of the Gaza front, Ariel. That is unfortunate.
Yeah, the IDF released for publication the death of a soldier, 19-year-old Sergeant Ori Ashkenazi Nehemia from Ashkelon. He is a fighter in the 401st Armored Brigade's 46th Battalion. According to an initial probe, he was killed by an anti-tank missile attack in South Gaza's Rafah city, and his death brings the death toll of Israeli soldiers killed in the ground operation in Gaza to 336.
All right. There is also a communique from the Prime Minister's office, which relates very much to an issue that we just discussed early in the program. Prime Minister's office sending out this message. The report, according to which the idea of placing an international force in the Philadelphia Access or Corridor was examined, is not true. Prime Minister Netanyahu insists on the principle that Israel will control the Philadelphia corridor with the aim of preventing the rearming of Hamas, which would allow the ability to repeat the atrocities of October 7th. So that relates to that story that we were talking about, whether you could see U.S. forces at least patrolling the border between Gaza and Egypt. But it is clear the Prime Minister, in a sense, almost reiterating, though, that he still wants to keep Israeli forces along the Philadelphia corridor, which would appear to be certainly one of the key sticking points now in the negotiations.
Yeah, Kalev, this response is in comment to a Wall Street Journal reporting, but I have to say this is the 4th evening in a row that the Prime Minister's office has issued a statement denying different reports that would have indicated Israel's willingness, flexibility to accept a proposal from the mediators, each evening denying a report from another channel or outlet. I think it is it's telling for the Israeli public that this is what the Prime Minister's office is doing on a daily basis, pretty much just denying reports left and right that would indicate flexibility that Secretary Blinken had indicated himself.
I want to ask Relic the last word on the Philadelphia corridor from a security standpoint. Should the government of Israel be flexible in terms of the arrangements?
Well, it really depends where you want to go. just like in Alice in Wonderland. If we want the release of the hostages, then this is a point that we could be flexible on. Obviously, the release of the hostages is not something that's going to last for 5 years. And take the disadvantage as a point in time where we want to release the hostages. Can always go back if things don't work right and get back there. So it's really a point of where you want to go.
All right, we'll have to end on that particular note. Relik Shafir, Nicole Tzedek, Ariel Oseron, thank you for joining us for this edition of The Rundown. And, of course, thank you to our viewers for joining us. Of course, you can continue to follow us on our website and all our social media platforms. And when I get the chance at the end of the program, I do say, let's see the hostages home as safe and soon as possible in any way possible. Thanks for joining us.